With the release of the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC, I've been forcefully exposed to some of the most fascinating and thought-provoking discourse I've ever seen. That being, which version of Radahn is the strongest? As if that isn't obvious. So naturally, I'm here today to compare the three versions of Radahn that we are aware of, and determine which one of them is top dog. To start, we of course have the original Radahn, the one that we see back in the story trailer for the main game, the one that most people would likely refer to as Prime Radahn, back during his fight with Malenia, when the two of them were known as the strongest of the demigods. This is the version we know the least about directly, simply because, well, pretty much everything he does is reserved for that trailer. However, there are quite a few things that we can apply to that version of Radahn based on the version that we fight in the game. But for the most notable stuff, obviously he is strong enough to match and force Malenia to use the Scarlet Aeonia. So at the very least, Prime Radahn back in the day is able to beat Phase 1 of Malenia. We also know that at this point, he had managed to conquer the stars, so clearly very powerful when it comes to his use of gravity magic, and that he used a spell at a scale of which we have never seen anyone use, and don't have anything that compares to it. The other notable things, of course, is that this is before Radahn lost his mind, so he's obviously much more skilled and competent compared to the Star Scourge we fight during the Radahn Festival. Outside of that, pretty much everything else that he can presumably do will be based on the Star Scourge Radahn, the Scarlet Radahn general who we fight in the Wailing Dunes. So, obviously, our introduction to him is him shooting us with an intercontinental ballistic missile known as one of his arrows, which is actually a spear. He seems to be able to fire these from an absolutely absurd range, attaches gravity magic to them. He can also make it rain arrows somehow. He can do scatter shots. And then you get into range of Radahn, and he starts doing his big sword combos, which, for the most part, are honestly just sort of the wild flailing of an insane person. However, he is still very big and very strong, and still has enough aptitude with gravity magic to be able to gather stone around the blades to effectively just turn them into giant bludgeoning clubs. He can create shockwaves, he can use his star collar. He still has quite a bit of aptitude with gravity magic despite being insane. And he is still good enough at using it to launch himself up into low orbit and then strike down like a meteorite without taking any damage, and without Leonard being damaged at all. We then get into some more abilities that we see from him. He's able to do rock sling, he's able to create a bunch of gravity orbs that track after you, and he's able to do his big gravity vortex psycho crusher, which is probably his most over-the-top move in the second phase. Needless to say, Radahn's capable of quite a few impressive feats, even after he's been rotting away for God knows how long. However, there are still obviously quite a few problems for this version of Radahn. One, he's lost his fucking mind. He has had his brain rotted away by the Scarlet Aeonia, and so he has essentially just become a mad, raving beast with only enough sanity left to maintain his hold on the stars and not eat his horse. Speaking of the horse, he kind of needs Leonard to get around for the most part, because after just sort of dragging his feet for so long, they've worn off. So the man just doesn't have any feet to stand on. Yeah, he can sort of charge forward a little bit for a few seconds, but eventually he does need Leonard to come back to him. Otherwise, he would just sort of be forced to crawl around everywhere. And it doesn't seem like he can do the Psycho Crusher forever, so it's not like the guy can just fly perpetually. So yeah, I think that's pretty much everything we see from the Star Scourge. And as far as the gravity magic feats go, I think it's pretty safe to say that the version of Radahn that fought Melania is capable of doing all of those things. Because it's not as if he would have learned more applications of gravity magic after losing his mind. I don't think that would have been the case. So, if the version of Radahn that fought Melania has all of these abilities but is sane, has a perfectly healthy body, and can still move without his horse, I think it's pretty safe to say that the Shattering Radahn is definitely stronger than Star Scourge Radahn. Now we get into the newest version of the Red Lion, the Promised Consort Radahn, who, oh boy, a lot of people have made some interesting claims about this one. So for starters, this is Radahn's soul placed inside of Mohg's body, which has been transformed to more match the appearance of Radahn. Specifically, a younger version of him. So as a result, he is a bit smaller and has omen horns growing out of him, so he does not have any of the grace of the Erd Tree within him. Many people would argue that because he is in Mohg's body instead of his own original one, clearly this means he's much weaker. This is a younger version of Radahn as opposed to quote-unquote Prime Radahn. Clearly, he's much weaker. That's not necessarily true at all. Mohg's body is very old. Mohg is older than Radahn. He is one of Marika's original children with Godfrey. If the demigods work on a general idea of getting stronger with age, that means Mohg's body should theoretically be physically more powerful than Radahn's, or at least comparable to it. He wasn't as big as Radahn, so he probably didn't have as much pure muscle mass. But when you combine the fact that he was a demigod, a very old demigod, and also a lot of the physical boons that come from being an omen, such as just seemingly greatly increased durability and physical strength, it's not as if Radahn's soul was slapped into a particularly weakened body. I mean, we fought Mohg. That guy is really goddamn strong. It's also not as if Radahn has lost any of his knowledge of gravity magic, because it's his soul. And it's his soul after we beat him in the Radahn Festival. So it's still him with all of his previous knowledge and experience using gravity magic. In fact, we see him use it with greater aptitude in the Promised Consort fight than we do during the Radahn Festival. He's able to use his Psycho Crusher pretty regularly. He's able to fly up into the air and rock sling at us. He's able to use his Star Collar a lot, and it has a follow-up gravity magic attack that's way more powerful than the one that he hits us with during the festival. And in addition to his gravity magic, due to being inside Mohg's body, he even has access to a little bit of blood flame magic, so even if some of his physical power was lost, he now has access to a little bit more than he had originally, a little bit more variety in terms of power. Now, if you want to argue that he's not as physically powerful as Radahn during the Shattering, and as a result he's weaker, okay, I guess that's fine, I suppose. But then we get to Phase 2, where he stops being the Promised Consort and then is just the actual consort of Miquella. Now, some people have argued that, oh, it's not really Radahn doing any of this stuff, it's just Miquella casting spells while he's on Radahn's back. And while that is true for the likes of Miquella's Light, the big nuke that slows down your computer, most of the applications of Miquella's magic is being channeled through Radahn. And Radahn is Miquella's consort, which, as far as we can tell, generally means that you are able to channel through you the power of your god. The consort is a person who is able to share in the power of their Empyrean turned god. And that's exactly what Radahn is doing because he's a consort. That's part of his role, and thus part of his power at this point to be able to use some of Miquella's power. That's why all of his attacks at this point just become imbued with Miquella's light. He is able to use Miquella's rings of light. All of his attacks get big AoEs and light rain attached to them. The only moves that I wouldn't say are Radahn's own would be the big nuke and Miquella's charm attack. And then you get Radahn's signature meteor strike, which is further enhanced by Miquella's magic to let him travel at the fucking speed of light, to do a speed of light meteor strike, which he adds a little more sauce onto by throwing his swords down before he lands. He does it better than the Star Scourge does. So, big shocker, the version of Radahn that you fight at the end of the endgame scale, the DLC, who gives you as many souls as the final boss, is the only other boss that you get the words "God slain" for beating, and, well, was the strongest demigod, his soul, put in the body of one of the strongest children of Queen America, and then has an actual god on his shoulders, is in fact the strongest version of Radahn.